Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We'll give it about 2 minutes before we get started. Let everyone get on the call. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I sent out a YouTube link. There is no Teams meeting today. I will be getting off Teams right now. Please make sure that you do join the link that I sent out for the YouTube training video. So that can be found via Outlook as well as the email that I just sent out. Thank you very much. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's give everybody a couple more minutes to get on to this day's training program. A little bit of mix up with Teams, which is not a surprise. We'll get about 60 seconds or so, and we'll go ahead and start the training. All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes. We got some people still logging on to the training. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give it a couple more minutes. We got some people still joining the call, some issues logging on, which is to be expected. We've never used this technology before for training, so we'll give it a couple of minutes, give everyone a couple of seconds to get on the call. It wouldn't be a good training, would it, unless we had an issue? It's to be expected. We'll give it a couple more minutes, let some people get on the call. Thank you for staying with us. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining this evening's training. I am your host, Derek Stonecipher, for those of you who do not know me. I want to say before we start, we do realize there's a lot going on in the organization. You have raw material shortages, labor shortages, so on and so forth. So I know there's a lot going on, a lot of stressors happening. So thank you so much for joining the call. Thank you for your attention for this 1 hour training. I do want to mention as well, we have Dreamline and Arizona Shower Doors on this training, which is the first training they've been on with us. So welcome, we're so happy to have you. So for this month, we have a continuation of our empowerment training, I should say. Last month, like I mentioned last week, we had David Marquet on about a month ago, and this is a continuation of that training. Now, last week I promised you an epic journey. The call ended up not being so epic. The call actually didn't happen. So thank you for joining me on this call. Let's get this right this time. We are doing YouTube Live, which is great. So happy to be here, happy to have you with me. So what we've done for this training is we have taken proven principles for how to create empowered thinkers and woven it into a story form just for you. So no one else has seen this content. You were the first person to see this content. Every principle is wrapped up in this story, this one leader's journey that he has found for how to create highly empowered thinkers. So you may recall the vignettes in Challenge 4 that we had you do, that we had you go through. And that was partially, those vignettes are woven into this story. So as you go through this story, this journey with us to discover what truly takes to create highly empowered thinkers, think back towards how you answered the different vignettes and how you would have solved the issue, and try to draw comparisons and parallels between how it's resolved through this manager in the story and how you said that you would resolve it. Now, for everyone who's on the meeting, in order to use chat function, if you have a question while we're going through the video, you may have some questions you want me to address at the end. Use that chat function that you see within YouTube, but you have to be logged into your Google account or your YouTube account in order to utilize it. Now, I don't want any further delays, so let's go ahead and get started on this epic journey together.
Level Up, The Art and Science of Empowerment. Chapter 1. Walking into the familiar scene, he slowly made his way to his favorite stool on the far side of the bar. "Usual, Frank," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Another one of those days, Augustus," replied the bartender, with the kind of casual sympathy one would expect. "Yeah, something like that," he replied. Running his hands through his well-kept hair, Augustus ruminated. "I can't keep going like this. Something's gotta change." Augustus, a local success, was no stranger to the challenges of industry. Long days followed by short nights, the expanding wrinkles in his otherwise youthful face were beginning to show the toll it was taking. The gin and tonic felt extra comforting this night. "Another, Frank." As the earthy taste of gin washed down, Augustus noticed an unfamiliar figure walking in. Not wanting to draw the stranger's attention, he diverted his eyes to one of the many trophy heads adorning the walls of the rustic bar. To his dismay, the scruffy man walked up and picked up the stool no less than 3 feet away. Annoyed, Augustus pretended to not notice the stranger's intrusion. After a few seconds of silence, the stranger, or Scruff as we will refer to him, with his unkempt beard and gray hair, turned toward Augustus and said, "How are you, son?" An expression his father used to say. Augustus felt his tension soften. "I've been better, but I'm making it." With a look of genuine intrigue on his sun-aged face, Scruff responded, "Well, I've got all night if you want to bend my ear." Motioning for the check, Augustus responded, "Honestly, I don't think you'd understand. Plus, it's getting late and my wife is going to get worried." Studying the man, Scruff speculatively replied, "If I had to guess, I'd say you're having trouble with something at work. Probably something to do with your team, am I right?" "What makes you say that?" Augustus said with a slight chuckle. "Well, first you mentioned going home to your wife, so I'd assume you aren't here pining over marital problems. And from your attire, pretty easy to assume that you're in business. And something about your demeanor tells me you're probably managing more than a few individuals." "You got all of that out of 5 minutes with me at a bar?" With a casual shrug, Scruff said, "Am I right?" "Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. But how did you—" Before he could even finish, Scruff interjected, "Why don't you tell me about it? I may be a little bit more useful than you think." After quick deliberation, Augustus obliged the old man. Not that he thought this guy was going to solve his problems. To Augustus, this was simply the perfect excuse to grab another one before he hit the road. Despite his speculation, Augustus started. "It's just so frustrating." "What is, son?" "My team. I can't get them to take ownership. It's like they expect me to do everything for them." Continuing, Augustus said, "And for those that do make decisions, I have to go back and revise their mistakes so often, it isn't even worth the effort. I just wish I could get my team to make good decisions and stop lobbing the ball up to me." So wrapped up in his own story, Augustus hardly noticed the amused grin forming behind Scruff's overgrown mustache. As if he picked up on something that Augustus had overlooked, Scruff responded, "Well, have you ever taught them how to?" "How to what?" he replied. "How to actually think." Puzzled by this, Augustus responded, I don't know. That's what they're supposed to do." "Yes, but have you taught them?" Scruff replied. Annoyed by the continued inquiry, Augustus responded with a chuckle. "I don't have time to be everyone's teacher. I've got my own job, and I can't just sit around and let my team make poor decisions. You couldn't possibly understand." Sensing Augustus's frustration, Scruff replied with the kind of genuine understanding that only old men can. You have a point. You can't be everyone's teacher all of the time. Let me tell you what. If you're willing to listen to an old man, I've got a story that I think may help." Finishing off his second gin and tonic, Augustus looked up at the clock above the bar. "Okay," he responded as he ordered another one, "but I need to be home by 11, which means we've got about an hour." It was 1980. With promises of government deregulation and increased reliance on free market capitalism under the Reagan administration, business forecasts were bright. Well, seemed that way to us, Scruff said. Augustus, surprised, turned to look at Scruff, noticing for the first time the golden pen sticking out of the breast pocket of his flannel. That's odd, he thought to himself. Scruff continued. At the time, my roommates and I were just out of school. Entrepreneurs at heart, we knew it was the right time to get into business. Inflation rates were crazy, though, which made it difficult to get a reasonable loan. We ended up getting lucky, though, and found someone that was willing to bet on us. With an astonished expression, Augustus said, You started your own company? Not to be rude, I just didn't peg you for a businessman. At one time, yes, Scruff replied, unfazed by the young man's response. Scruff paused just long enough for Augustus to begin nursing his third gin. Well, we bought an old distribution center about 50 miles from where we went to school. Place was a mess. The windows were cracked and lined with brown soot. The ceiling filled with cobwebs. It was exploding with insulation, and there were rats. Big ones. But for us, it would do for now. We just divided responsibilities amongst us. Dan took manufacturing, procurement, and logistics. Joe, he took customer service and warranty. I took control of marketing, sales, and accounting, though I wasn't much of an accountant. For years, we did it all. Now facing Scruff, Augustus said, God, that sounds rough. Raising his eyebrows in acknowledgement, Scruff continued. Business was slow to start, but after a few years, we were already at $1 million in sales. And at that point, we knew we had to hire more people. Augustus half choked on his drink. $1 million in sales? Yup, he responded, with the kind of nonchalant tone Augustus had quickly come to expect. We ended up hiring 100 more employees to expand our capacity. And at this point, I had a team of 10 under me that made up both sales and marketing. Amused, Augustus said, Oh yeah? And how was that? Managing 10 people? A nightmare at the time. A grin enveloping his clean-shaven face, Augustus responded, Then you know exactly how I feel. Scruff looked at him with a slight smirk, as if to say, Told you I could help. That's it, we're done. Hanging up the phone, he hung his head. He had just lost an account. Dirk, senior sales manager of the Southeast Territory, had been trying to talk down French Quarter Charm, a New Orleans-based customer specializing in kitchen and home decor. FQC had been purchasing cabinets from oak and brass for years, but a series of damaged units had left them with more than a few upset homeowners. Scruff, I've just spoken with our rep from FQC. I tried talking to him, but he said they're taking their business elsewhere. What? He responded emphatically. Why? The shipping damage has been fixed? Why would they pull out now? Well, Dirk responded softly, they found another vendor who was willing to come in at a lower price point. His eyes and face turning red at the thought, Scruff sat silent. Haltingly, Dirk said, What do you want me to do? Call them back and tell them that the shipping issue has been fixed and that we will guarantee an on-site repair agent for each delivery for the next 6 months, Scruff advised. Interjecting into his story, Augustus said, See, this is exactly the kind of stuff I deal with. No one wants to take charge and make a decision. They want the boss to do it. Nodding, Scruff replied, It was one of those situations where I couldn't go on vacation without rushing to a payphone every hour, anticipating that someone would need me to make a decision about something. Everyone was dependent on me, and I thought that was how it was supposed to be. I was the boss, after all, and we were still relatively small at the time, so it was working. Federal deregulation in 1981 on loan institutions was like throwing gasoline on an already burning economy. With recent acts put into place, these institutions were now engaged heavily in high-risk loans. As high-risk investments in casinos, ski resorts, fast food franchises, and other ventures took hold, many businesses did not anticipate what was to come in 1983. Scruff and his partners, though competent in economic trends, were none the wiser. Scruff sat somberly in his chair. Head down, he was trying to plan his next move. What could he do? How would he save his company? His lender, drowning in debt from poor investments, was forcing businesses to pay back the loans or foreclose on their assets. "How did I not see this coming?" he said aloud. He felt a lump in his throat begin to form as he pondered his own question. "I've been sucked into the weeds for so long, I couldn't see the forest for the trees," he said. "My main responsibility is to keep this place open and thriving, and I've failed to do that." As he scanned his memory of the past few years, looking for the answer to why this happened, it struck Scruff like a bolt of lightning. "I've failed to teach my people to think for themselves. They come to me to make a decision. I give it to them. They come to me to solve a problem. I solve it for them. No questions asked, no thought given other than go do this. And because of it, I couldn't pay attention to the bigger picture. Now look at us. We're done if we don't find a way to pay back the loan. I should have seen this coming. I should have done something sooner." Augustus, eyes wide like a child listening to his grandfather's favorite war story, said, "So what happened?" "Well, it was a close call, but luckily it worked out. We were able to get a couple of venture capitalists to buy out our loan before anything happened. The point, though, is that it was a true wake-up call for me," he said in a soft but serious tone. "So, what did you end up doing about it?" With a smile, Scruff said, we'll get there. Just hold on." Spotting Gustav on her way to the conference room, Jane said nervously, "Did you get the memo too?" "Yeah. Do you know what it's about?" he said, equally as tense. "I have no clue, but I'm glad I'm not the only one," she responded. Rounding the corner of the glorified break room, they were met by 8 others from their team, the room quiet with anticipation. "Do you know what that says?" asked Sammy. Squinting her eyes to make out the squiggly lines drawn on the board, Jane responded, "I think it says empowerment." And at that moment, Scruff entered the room. "You got it, Jane," he said reassuringly. "I want to start off by saying I haven't done my job as a leader." The anxiousness of the room amplified. "Am I being fired? Are we losing our jobs? What am I going to tell my husband? With the unemployment rates, I won't be able to find another job." Sensing the tension, Scruff offered relief. "I want to be clear. This meeting is not about letting anyone go or anything like that. This is simply about me doing a better job as your leader." The strained faces of his audience softened. "As you are all aware, the economy has been, well, it's not been great. 3 months ago, we had to navigate through some difficulties. And during that time, I came to a realization." He glanced over at the lone word on the dusty chalkboard. "For years, we've been working together, successfully building out this company. But we're growing now. Sales are increasing, territories are expanding, and new accounts are coming in every week." Known for his candidness, Scruff did not sugarcoat it. "I need each of you to start making more empowered decisions in your territories. I can't be everywhere all the time to make decisions for you. You're the most knowledgeable person in your area. You know the opportunities that exist, the customers that need the most attention, and you know the competition. When an issue comes up or a decision needs to be made, I need each of you to start making the call. And I want to be clear, I'm not blaming any of you. I've not done my job in allowing you to make decisions and solve problems. I own this issue." Not one for long meetings, he quickly gathered consensus. "So, Does everyone understand the expectation of what I'm asking? Is everyone comfortable with this?" Excitement beamed across the room as relieved faces unanimously nodded. "Excellent," Scruff said, pleased by the outcome. "Let's get started with this today." "Wait, are you trying to tell me that was all it took to get your team to take ownership? You just told them that you needed them to be empowered, and poof, it happened," snarked Augustus. Amused, Scruff remarked, "Oh, no, son. I thought at the time that it'd be that simple, but I had a lot to learn." "Left, left, pull left," he said, rolling his second gutter ball of the night. Drifting from the game, his mind toiled over all the different possibilities. What if I make a mistake? What if I lose an account? What if I don't know what to do? Who will I turn to? Will he think I'm unfit for my job? Scruff's empowerment meeting with the team that afternoon had left Johnny with more than a few concerns. Born into a lower-middle-class family in the burbs of Philadelphia in 1950, Johnny was no stranger to hard work. His father, an engineer for a local carpet manufacturing plant, worked from sunup to far past sundown to provide for the family. After the shutdown of the Kensington Star Mill, his father took work where he could find it, eventually finding a niche in oven repairs. While their father was away at work, James, Johnny's older brother, was left in charge. But Johnny never had any issue with this. In fact, he felt comfort in knowing that his older brother took care of things. When they needed money, James found them after-school jobs at a local convenience store. When they needed something to be fixed in the house, James would fix it. Johnny looked to his brother as the leader, and that is what he did, followed his lead. Early in his career, Johnny worked in a couple of sales positions for local businesses. "Don't think, just sell," was the prevailing dogma of his bosses. So that is what he did. He sold, and he was good at it. Now the West Coast sales manager at Oak and Brass, Johnny felt at ease knowing that if there was an issue in his territory, Scruff would be there to make the call. Uncertainty now filling his every thought, Johnny's mind kept waning from the bowling match. "I'm gonna have to talk to him tomorrow," Johnny thought. "I don't feel comfortable with the change." Sitting down in his office, Johnny was greeted with Scruff's comforting tone. "So, what's going on? What can I do for you?" "Well, sir, it's about the meeting yesterday." "Ah, okay. What do you got for me?" replied Scruff. "I was thinking about it a lot last night. Making more empowered decisions has got me a little bit concerned." Sensing his distress, Scruff offered encouragement. "You've been with us for 3 years now, Johnny. You know your territory better than anyone. What are you concerned about?" "Well, thank you, sir," he replied. "I guess I just like things the way that they are. I'm a salesman. That's what I do. It's what I'm good at. Well, I can sell almost anyone. But when it comes to making decisions, I feel like that's what you're here for." "And there it is," Augustus sneered. "That's what they're all like. They want to do the tasks they're comfortable with, but when it comes to making decisions and solving problems, nope, that's someone else's responsibility." Pensively looking at Augustus as if he had a secret to share, Scruff said, "What do you think I learned from this?" After a moment's deliberation, Augustus was at a loss for words. "I don't know," he responded. "Maybe that you should have hired someone with more ambition." "No. I learned the first of what I would later refer to as the 3 considerations of empowerment." "Oh, yeah?" snickered Augustus. "And what would that be?" "Desire and confidence," Scruff replied. Pausing, Scruff found an expression on Augustus's face that read, "Yeah, and?" Pleased with the unspoken inquiry, Scruff continued, "What I've learned in my time is that for empowerment to be truly effective, an employee needs to have confidence in their abilities and the desire to be empowered. If they don't, empowerment won't work." Still unsure of his merit, but willing to play along, Augustus responded, "Okay, I'll bite. So, what did you do next?" Pumping in the last gallon of gas, Johnny scoffed at the total. Can you believe these prices? They've nearly doubled in the last 7 years. Scruff replied, I know. What are we at, $1.12 now? Yeah, well, that's California for you, responded Johnny. All right, let's get this show on the road. We don't want to be late, said Scruff. Shutting the squeaky door to the 75 station wagon, they were off to see another customer. Johnny and Scruff had been on the road together 1 or 2 days a week for the past 3 weeks. Driving up Interstate 5 from Los Angeles to Sacramento in the clunker Johnny had nicknamed Goldie after his favorite actress, they were calling on customers throughout Johnny's West Coast territory. Truth be told, Scruff did not have the time to be on the road, but he hoped that the time invested would prove fruitful. After 60 minutes of what seemed to be endless beratement, the meeting was over. Charlie, a prominent developer in the Sacramento area, had just unloaded his frustration, brought on by the 2 incorrect truckloads received at one of his sites. Walking out of the showroom, Johnny studied Scruff's face, searching for direction, but deep in thought as he often was, Scruff's stoic expression gave no such answer. After a moment's silence on the road, Scruff said, Pull over at the next exit so we can find a payphone. Got it, replied Johnny. What's the plan? We need to call the ops and shipping manager from Plant 3. An expedited plan to get the correct units to the job site is what we need. Perceiving a teaching moment, Scruff said, So, anytime we've shipped wrong units to a customer, the first thing you need to do is work out a quick solution with the plant and shipping manager. That way, we can hopefully turn the situation around quickly. But you can't stop there. That only solves this one acute issue. You'll need to take it a step further and work out a prevention plan with them to make sure this does not happen again. Head nodding and mouth pursed, a look that told Scruff he had already known the answer, Johnny said, Yes, sir, that makes sense. Perplexed, Augustus chimed in. If Johnny knew the answer, then why did you give it to him? That doesn't seem empowering at all. Sure it is, replied Scruff. What did I say is the first of 3 things a manager should consider when empowering employees? Desire and confidence? Yep, and what did Johnny lack? Inquired Scruff. Confidence? Replied Augustus. Exactly. Johnny had the answer all along, but he didn't have the confidence to do anything about it. So I directed him to do what was needed and explained why the decision was necessary. Okay, I get that. But how does that build his confidence? Doesn't that just perpetuate his dependence on you? Augustus responded. If empowerment stopped there, then yes, it would. But this is just one of many steps that it takes to develop empowered thinkers, replied Scruff. Intrigued, Augustus said, Interesting. So what'd you do next? You'll see, Scruff replied with a wink. Back in the office after the road trips with Johnny, Scruff received a call. In haste, Johnny said, Scruff, I'm on the site of the hotel project we spec'd several months back. The units arrived today in good condition, but the height is off by half an inch. The contractor's telling me there's now too little space above the counter. What should I do? The urge to instruct Johnny came bursting through him like a secret he had been holding in for far too long, but he resisted. Knowing well that Johnny had the answer, Scruff replied, Okay, what do you recommend? Like an automated message pre-programmed to deflect ownership, Johnny replied, Whatever you want, just let me know and I'll get it done. A moment's pause led to an unexpected insight. Push back, Scruff thought to himself. He knows the answer. Now it's your job to get it out of him. Searching for words, Scruff responded, I know you will, Johnny. But if you were me, what would you suggest our course of action be? Doubt washing over him like a rising tide, Johnny said, I don't know, sir. Call the plant manager and see if we can expedite new units? We could do that, Scruff responded. But how long are our current lead times? About 20 days, replied Johnny. Ah, that's what I thought. The issue is that the contractor's not going to be willing to hold up construction for that long, said Scruff. Is there any quicker solution that we might offer? Suddenly, it clicked. Whoa, what if I had a few repair agents come out and modify the dimensions of the units? That would take about half the time that producing the new units would, Johnny said excitedly. Beaming with pride, Scruff replied, "That's a perfect solution. So what are your next steps?" His skepticism turning to genuine intrigue, Augustus jumped in. "So you basically led him to the answer that you were going to suggest in the first place?" Scruff responded, "Not exactly, son. All I did was ask a few thought-provoking questions to help him think and find the best solution. Did guiding take place? Sure. But what I've found in my time is that your people won't always know the best solution, so it's your job to help them think through the situation to find it. But the trick is, you can't give them the answer. If you do, they'll never truly learn to think." "That actually makes a lot of sense," Augustus responded. "So you were intentionally on the road a few weeks with Johnny, helping him to build his confidence. Then, when you knew he was ready, you stopped giving him answers and shifted into asking him what he recommended." "Spot on, son. And though I didn't know it at the time, I was helping him become a better thinker, something I later referred to as moving from level 1, the apprentice, to level 2, the thinker." "So what happened? Did Johnny figure out his next steps and get it done?" asked Augustus. Nostalgic pride setting in, Scruff responded with a grin. "He sure did. But before we continue with his story, I want to revisit Jane, my young, ambitious saleswoman. I think her story may resonate." Glancing up at the clock above the bar that read 11:30, Augustus was too invested to turn back now. "All right," he said, "let me hear it." Joining the local gym only 1 month after the move, Jane had no interest in spandex and spin classes. She was looking for a competitive outlet, which she quickly found in racquetball. Rising through the ranks in the local players bracket, this proved to be the competitive pastime she needed. Adrenaline flowed through her veins as she hit the game-winning shot. Gloating in victory, she yelled, "That's game!" Jane did her best to hold back the smirk forming on her face as her gangly opponent picked himself off the floor. "Rematch," he barked. "I want a rematch." Jane was not one to turn down a challenge, and had the source of her excitement been from this victory, she would have happily obliged her challenger. But something else had been fueling Jane, something that was consuming her every thought. "Rain check," she responded as she gathered her things before turning to exit the court. Growing up on the south side of Chicago with her father and 2 brothers, Jane grew up fast. Her father, the son of Irish immigrants, worked as a floor supervisor in a meatpacking plant not far from their house in Bridgeport. Long days at the plant followed by nights at the pub, Jane saw little of her father. Her brothers, though twins, could not be further from it. Jay, her favorite, was a tough yet caring boy. Although not the sharpest, he was a born athlete, setting rushing records at the local high school, some of which have yet to be broken. His twin Brad was what you would consider the quintessential tragic story. Though highly intelligent, poor choices and gang affiliation at an early age led Brad to a life of violence, something Jane wanted nothing to do with. Separating herself from her family at an early age, Jane poured into her studies and sports, eventually earning her a scholarship to the University of Chicago. But being the first person in her family to go to college was not enough for Jane, not nearly enough. She was on a mission to prove that there were no limits to her success. Working part-time as a sales agent at Macy's to support herself while in school, Jane honed her ability to close the deal, eventually taking on a full-time position post-graduation. Jane led not only the local team in sales, but all Macy's department stores in Chicago for 2 years running. But despite her success, Jane wanted more, much more. As fate would have it, Scruff had a cousin in Chicago that frequented the local Macy's with his wife. A referral and a few interviews later, and Jane found herself relocating to North Carolina to start as Oak & Brass's new East Coast Regional Sales Manager. Back at her apartment, the thoughts that had been driving Jane all afternoon had not subsided. "I can just see it now," she said out loud. "Jane Murphy, Executive VP of Sales." To Jane, the empowerment meeting Scruff had held that morning represented more than just an opportunity to start making empowered decisions. Jane's ambition was to one day lead the sales department at Oak and Brass, and to her, this meeting represented the opportunity she had been waiting for to get her foot in the door. Jane was not naive, however, and though already one of the top agents at Oak and Brass, she knew there was still much of the business to learn. Quelling her grandiose ambitions with reason, she added, "Okay, remember, you've only been here for a year. You are going to have to play this smart. You don't know everything yet. The last thing you want to do is take this opportunity and start making poor decisions." Jane swallowed her pride as the solution kept creeping its way back into her thoughts. Speaking aloud to herself, as she often did in the confines of her apartment, Jane said, "Look, you just have to do it. Ask him if he'll help you." Growing more certain of her decision, Jane finished off the last of her chamomile tea and prepared for the next day. "Good morning, Jane," Scruff greeted as she walked into his office. "I'd ask what's on your mind, but it would be rather amusing if you'd allow me to guess." Scruff prided himself in his ability to read people, a quality that his team had come to admire. "Okay, but if you get it wrong, you're buying lunch," she joked. "You're on. It's about the meeting yesterday, isn't it?" Searching her face for affirmation, his inquiry was met only with the faintest smirk that seemed to say, "Yes, and?" "And," he continued, "you've come to tell me that you are not comfortable with the change." Tickled by Scruff's miscalculation, Jane chuckled. "So, where are you buying me lunch from?" Exchanging laughs, Jane added, "No, I believe this is going to be a great learning experience for me." Scruff's face lit up. To him, Jane was his young superstar, and her buy-in for the change was the confirmation he needed. "But I feel like there are things that I still need to learn," Jane added. "You mean before being more empowered?" "Sort of," she responded. "Making decisions doesn't intimidate me. There are just things I don't know that I'll need help with while I'm transitioning into being more empowered. For example, if we send out a repair agent to fix a unit and he botches the job, do I have the customer field destroy the units? Do I submit an expedited order to ops? What about the repair agent? Do I get warranty and have them do something about the agent? What about discounts to customers? These are the types of decisions you've always handled in the past, so I need to know what my parameters are when solving these issues." Pausing to gather his thoughts, Scruff took a deep breath and looked off as if he had had an epiphany. His mind returning moments later to the conversation, Scruff replied, "Fair enough. Let me tell you what. I'm going to be on the road with Johnny for a couple of days over the next 3 weeks. When I'm done traveling, let's set up a weekly meeting, and we'll discuss these issues and their solutions. I'll only be a pager away to discuss anything you need in the meantime." Scruff paused his nostalgic story. Moments passed before Augustus intervened. "So, what did she say?" "She said yes. But do you know what I learned from this?" Scruff paused for Augustus to gather his thoughts. "That you can't coach everyone all at one time," he said in earnest. "Well, that's true, but not exactly what I was looking for. What I learned is that your people have to be competent in whatever area you're trying to empower them in. If they aren't, you're setting them up for failure." Nodding his head in agreement, Augustus replied, "That actually makes a lot of sense. So, did this become the second of your 3 considerations of empowerment?" The twinkle in Scruff's eye spoke volumes. "There may be hope for you yet, son." Beep beep, beep beep. Pulling his pager from his waist, Scruff saw the incoming message from Jane. "Pricing issue, please call." Picking up his landline, Scruff had Jane on the phone within seconds. "Hey, Jane. So, what's going on?" "Well, I just had a meeting with the developer at Southern Designs, and they told me that St. Charles' bid came in at 15% less than ours." St. Charles, a 20th century powerhouse, was Scruff's biggest competitor. A preferred choice by architects throughout most of the century, St. Charles cabinets were an iconic symbol of architectural status. something that Scruff envied greatly. To Scruff, outpacing St. Charles in market share and prestige was one of his prominent career goals. Scruff felt his heart begin to race as the thought of losing this project to his competitor filled him with anger. Maintaining his composure for Jane's sake, Scruff said, "Okay, here's what we'll need to know in order to make a good decision. First, are we looking at apples to apples here?" "You mean as far as the product specifications?" Jane replied. "Exactly." "Well, yes. St. Charles's bid was for the same finish, height, hinges, same knobs and pulls, same everything." "Okay," Scruff replied. "What about freight? Is their bid for FFA shipping or LTL?" "I didn't get that information, but I can turn around and go ask." "Okay, yeah, please do. Also, and probably most importantly, why is St. Charles at this price?" "What do you mean?" Jane replied. "Well, a 15% lower bid is cutting their margins pretty tight. So what's their motivation? Has something happened in your territory that is prompting them?" "Southern Design said that St. Charles had been putting pressure to move more of their business to them," Jane said. "Maybe we've become a thorn in their side." "Spot on," Scruff responded. "I have a strong inclination that our expansion into the northeast coast has gotten their attention. My gut tells me this is an attempt to squeeze us out. So, if everything is comparable as it relates to product specs and freight, and if our threat analysis tells us that we can't afford to give up this customer, then we will meet St. Charles's bid." "That absolutely makes sense. So, moving forward, is this how you want me to approach making pricing decisions?" After a moment's pause, Scruff replied, "Let's do this. When it comes to pricing decisions, gather the information that I've requested on this call and inform me of the decision you intend to make. I'll either approve it or discuss why another decision needs to be made." Pleased with his guidance, Jane smiled and said, "That sounds perfect. Thank you, Scruff." Puzzled, Augustus spoke up and said, "Wait, I'm confused. When you empowered Johnny, you went from telling him what to do and explaining why to asking him what he'd recommend and coaching. With Jane, it sounds like you went from telling and explaining straight into asking her to come to you with the decision she intends to make. Kind of feels like you skipped ahead." "Well, that's the art of empowerment, son," replied Scruff. "It's not a linear progression with every employee. With someone like Jane, who was confident and ambitious, it didn't take more than a couple times walking her through the process to get her to the point where she could come to me with the decision she intended to make. But there is something important that I learned from this interaction with Jane." "Are you going to make me guess what that is?" smirked Augustus. "For now, I'll spare you," Scruff said with a wink. "Probably the most important thing I learned is that some types of decisions will never make it past this level of empowerment, which later I come to refer to as level 3, the intender. And the reason why is where the third consideration of empowerment comes into play: context." Intrigued, Augustus replied, "Context? What do you mean by context?" "Well now, that is a good question. What I found over the course of my career is that context-related details, such as the level of scope and the employee, it all needs to be taken into account. For example, in this situation with Jane, she was able to bring to the table critical ground-level information, such as recent history with the customer, bid comparisons, and so on, which help in pricing decisions, but she would never be able to have enough scope to see macroeconomic forces that need to be accounted for. And I say that not to insinuate that she wasn't capable of that level of scope, but rather that the focus of her position would never allow the bandwidth to do so." Taking a pause to digest what he had heard, Augustus took that last sip of his fourth gin. Carefully placing the glass down, as if to avoid any disruption to his thought, he finally replied, "Okay, so does that mean most employees get stuck at what you refer to as level 3? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of empowering people if you still have to make the decision in the end?" "Before I answer that, let me ask you, what do you think the goal of empowerment is?" "To get people to take ownership of decisions that need to be made and problems that need to be solved," Augustus replied. In part, you're right, but in the process, you're teaching your people how to think, which is the real goal, to create better thinkers so that better decisions can be made. Scruff paused for a moment to let the thought resonate, but that doesn't mean that oversight and approvals aren't involved in the process. Let me tell you how things ended up with Johnny and Jane so you can see what I mean. Do you remember that issue that I helped Johnny think through, where the oversized cabinets were shipped to the hotel project? Asked Scruff. Augustus nodded. Well, it took about 6 more months of him coming to me for answers and me pushing back by asking what he'd recommend for his behavior to actually change. And eventually, within that first year, Johnny actually started coming to me with decisions he intended to make. But truth be told, son, I had to push him to get there. And how did you do that? Asked Augustus. Once I felt he was ready, I told him that moving forward, I expected him to gather the information and come to me with the decision he intended to make. Ah, so you basically set expectations to nudge him to keep progressing, asked Augustus. Correct. And past this point, I never gave him the answer, because if I did, I knew that if push came to shove, Johnny would fall back on me to give him the answer. So what about Jane? How did things turn out with her? Augustus asked, with the same wide-eyed look he'd given Scruff hours before. With a prideful smile, Scruff replied, She did outstanding. And all I did was simply take her through the same telling and explaining step I did with Johnny, which of course she progressed through quickly. Then when she was ready, I simply progressed into asking her what she recommended, instead of giving her the answer. And it wasn't long after that when she started coming to me for approval for the decisions she intended to make. Jane even progressed past the point of coming to me for approval for a lot of her decisions. Relieved, Augustus said, Okay, so then there is a level of empowerment that you found where you finally don't have to make the decision. Turning to face Augustus, Scruff smiled and responded, Sure there is. But no matter who you are, son, whether you own your own business or work at a senior level, you always seem to answer to someone. So your question shouldn't be, how can I get my team to a place so that I no longer have to make decisions? But instead, how can I create thinkers who can make decisions and solve problems? And when decisions are made or problems occur, when and how should coaching and oversight occur? That's where real empowerment lies. Augustus fell silent. Scruff, confident that it would click, fell silent alongside him. Okay, so you're saying that oversight occurs at all levels of empowerment, but as an employee gains higher levels of empowerment, the type and frequency changes, asked Augustus. See, I told you there was hope for you yet, Scruff said with a cheesy grin. Did it work? Did what work, son? Did your method of empowering the team work? Augustus replied. Taking out the gold pen from the front pocket of his flannel, Scruff started to write something down. Placing the card down on the bar minutes later, he replied, If you're ever in Outer Banks, look me up. Holding the front of the card at an angle so the light would hit it, Augustus read, Arnold Byrne, Outer Banks Charter Fishing. Upon turning the card around, Augustus saw Scruff's handwritten note. He studied it intensely before looking back up. Is this what I think it is? Augustus asked as he turned to face Scruff. He was gone. Frank, where'd he go? He just closed your tab and left, Frank replied. Augustus rushed to the parking lot to catch him before it was too late, but he was nowhere to be found. Weeks went by, and Augustus could not stop wondering who Scruff really was, and if what he'd heard was all a fabrication. Curiosity getting the better of him, Augustus decided to look up the name on the card that Scruff had given him. No way. Reading through the first several articles in his search, the information that Augustus found left him in shock. I had no idea who I was talking to. As it turns out, Scruff, or Arnold Byrne as he was known, had owned one of the most prominent cabinet manufacturing companies in North America. After their acquisition of St. Charles in 2005, Oak & Brass's track record drew the attention from numerous buyers. Becoming a multi-millionaire at 60, after he sold Oak & Brass in 2010 for just north of an astounding $800 million, Arnold moved to the Outer Banks in North Carolina to start a charter fishing company. Reanalyzing the back of the card he had been given, Augustus thought to himself, "Damn, I guess it worked."
All right. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Let me give a quick debrief for you. So this is the model of empowerment that was on the back of Scruff's card that he handed Augustus. And you may be asking yourself, why would Scruff have represented empowerment in such an unstructured form? Why would he have drawn a parallel between Pac-Man and empowerment? So let me tell you. If you've ever played the game of Pac-Man, hopefully you know this, but Pac-Man was created in 1980, the same year that Scruff started his business. That's not mere coincidence. Let me give you an overview of the game of Pac-Man so I can draw a parallel between Pac-Man and empowerment a little bit better. So in the game of Pac-Man, it was a traditional arcade game created in the 1980s. In the arcade game, you controlled this little guy right here that I'm hovering over. He was Pac-Man. And his sole goal throughout the entire game was to go around this board and gather as many dots or pellets as he could. Now, the more dots or pellets he gathered, the higher the points he gained, and the game was a never-ending game. You just continue to gain more and more points, go to different levels, so on and so forth. Now, these little ghosts right here, their sole objective was to work against Pac-Man, to stop his progress and end the game. Now, as Pac-Man traveled around this board and gained more points, he could always go to one of these power balls that you see in each corner of the board. Now, once he got to these power balls and once he ate these power balls, Pac-Man got bigger and he turned around and he started chasing the ghosts. And I'm going to get to my point here shortly, but the game of Pac-Man itself is super similar to empowerment. Very similar. And one of the ways that it's similar is it's a chaotic game. It's always moving, it's always going, it's bam, bam, bam. It's a super fast-paced game and it's chaotic. And as in a leadership in your position, in a leader's position, you know that developing people, it's always messy. It's never perfect. It's never a perfect progression to developing people. So when you see different models that put people in little boxes and show, perfect linear progressions, we know in the real world that does not represent what real life is. But Pac-Man does represent what empowerment is. Another way, besides it being chaotic, that Pac-Man represents what empowerment is in real life, developing people into better thinkers is in real life, are these three ghosts right here that I mentioned. So as your employees are being developed into better thinkers, these three ghosts right here are always going to be working against your employee, always. Now, these three ghosts are what we consider the three considerations of empowerment. And their sole job is to stop your employee from being empowered, to stop them from developing into better thinkers. For example, desire and confidence, that's your one consideration of empowerment. If an employee does not have that, they're not going to be empowered. If they lack competence, if your employee lacks competence, they lack the knowledge to make the decision, they're not going to be empowered. If the context itself is not favorable, if they lack scope, if the issue at hand is too time sensitive to empower or it's too costly, that's working against your employee. So as a general rule of thumb, when you're empowering your employees, the more that these ghosts are working against the employee, the lower the level of empowerment you want to give. And the converse of that is true as well. So just remember, in this case, and when you're empowering employees, these ghosts are always working against your employees. Always make sure you keep these things in mind. Make sure that you help your employee overcome whichever one of these it is that's holding them back. Now, Let's take a look at these power balls. These power balls that you see in each corner, these in this model that Scruff created represents the different levels of empowerment. So at a level 1, you have something that we refer to as the apprentice. And this is simply where a manager is telling the employee whatever the solution may be and explaining why. This is a very important step to do, as it helps to build the foundational level of knowledge for an employee to continue to be more empowered in the future. Now, as we look at level 2 is what we consider the thinker. This is where instead of giving your employee the answer, you start pushing back. Like Scruff did with Johnny, you push back, you don't give them the answer, and you start asking them thought-provoking questions. What would you recommend? If you were me, how would you approach this? You start getting their mind thinking through the solution. Very critical step to creating highly empowered, very solid thinkers on your team. Now, if we look at level 3 over here, this is what we call the intender. Now, this level is heavily based on David Marquet's intent-based leadership. At the intender level, the employee, they have competence, they have the knowledge to make the decision, they're confident in their abilities, and they start coming to you with the decisions they intend to make. They've done the legwork, they've done their homework, and they start coming to you saying, hey, look, I know what decision I want to make. Are you cool with this? And as a manager in your position, as a leader to your team, your sole objective here is to either approve it or redirect them through more thought-provoking questions. That's the biggest thing that you play. It's the biggest role that you play here. So there's a key distinction between level 2 and level 3. Hopefully you picked up on it. In level 2, the employee is still coming to you seeking an answer. Level 3, they're coming to you with the answer that they want to implement, the solution they want to implement. As a rule of thumb, you want to get all of your employees, no matter what level you're at in an organization, to at least a level 3. You want everyone that's on your team to at least be at a level 3. That's where organizations function optimally. It's when everyone, they're doing their homework, they're finding solutions, and they're coming to you for approval to implement these solutions. So as a goal, as a leader to your team, this level 3, that's where you want everyone to be. Now, there is a level above level 3, and this is level 4, what we consider the empowered. At this level, your employees, they're experts at what they do. They are the expert, they have the answers, and they make decisions day in, day out. They don't come to you for approval anymore. They go ahead, they make decisions. And your job is simply to govern from afar. So things like weekly KPI reports, weekly productivity reports, so on and so forth. So that is what your job is there. This level 4, it's really reserved more for kind of higher levels in an organization, as it's safer to give these employees a little bit less oversight. But as a rule of thumb, you want everyone approaching this level 3. That should be your goal, is for everyone to be at a level 3. That's where companies function optimally. Now, a question that you may have is, okay, so how much time should I spend with an employee at each phase or at each level of empowerment? I'm going to be real with you and be the first person to be real with you about this. No one knows that answer. No one knows that answer. It's person by person specific. Some of your employees, they're going to be gaining confidence in their abilities and they're going to be gaining knowledge very, very quickly. Others, it may take longer. Everyone can get to level 3. It's just going to take a little bit longer for some people. Some people may take a few weeks. So no one has a shortcut answer. You have to know your employees. You have to work with them and get to know them very well. So as we kind of conclude this training, I'm going to do a very short recap video after this to kind of get into level 2 and level 3 in a little bit better detail to show you what type of questions you should be asking, what those conversations look like, those thought-provoking questions. What do they look like? What should the conversation look like? So I'm going to do a post-training video on that. But it's our true, sincere hope that as you think about how can I create better thinkers on my team, that this model, so to speak, of empowerment is out of the box enough for you to remember. So the next time someone comes to you and says, hey, I got an issue, what do you want me to do? You think back to this and say, does this person, are they competent to make the decision? Are they confident in their abilities? Can I go ahead and push them to that next level? So that's our true, sincere hope. I do want to say, one of the most important roles as a leader that you can play of anything that you can possibly do is that of someone who invests time and energy into developing your people. It's one of the most powerful roles that you can have. It's one of the most powerful things you have to give, to offer to your employees. And that's the last way that Pac-Man, the last parallel between Pac-Man and empowerment, is that Pac-Man, he never stops moving. As you're playing this arcade game, Pac-Man's always moving across the board. And that's very similar to you in a leadership role. You should never stop developing your people, ever. Never stop developing your people. You should never let your people become stagnant, especially as it relates to creating better thinkers. You should never do that. So thank you so much for joining this training. We do have a post-training challenge that will come out. Post-training challenge will be challenge 5. I'm very excited about this challenge. Essentially, the challenge is taking this information for how to create more empowered thinkers and problem solvers and actually doing something with it. The exciting part is in this challenge, this challenge 5, there will be a winner, and the winner of the challenge will get this year's David Marquet Empowerment Award for 2021. So very exciting stuff. Very looking forward to what you come out with and what you come up with. Very much so looking forward to seeing that. Hopefully you got something out of this training. I enjoyed spending this time with you today. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see you next month. Thank you.